Sorry. Good evening and welcome everyone to this meeting of Winchester Town Forum. The time is 6:30. My name is Simon Hendy, Strategic Director for Winchester City Council. As this is the first meeting of the municipal year, I'm opening the meeting to take the first procedural item on the agenda, the appointment of the chairperson and vice chairperson for the 24-25 municipal year. Firstly, please could I ask the forum for nominations for the position of chairperson for 24-25?
I'd like to nominate Councillor Reach.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for that nomination?
Yes, I'd like to second that.
Thank you. Is there a show of hands for Councillor Reach to be chairperson for municipal year 24-25? Thank you very much. I confirm that Councillor Reach has been duly elected as the chairperson of Winchester Town Forum for 24-25. Thank you. Now moving on, could I please ask the forum for nominations for the position of vice chairperson for 24-25? Are there any proposals, please?
I'd like to nominate my fellow councillor sitting next to me, Councillor Buffo, as vice chair.
Thank you. Is there seconder for that, please?
I will second that.
Thank you, Councillor Kelsey. Show of hands for Councillor Batho being the vice chairperson for municipal year 24-25. Thank you very much. Chairperson Councillor Reach to open the meeting and proceed with the rest of the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hendy. Well done. Good job. And thank you, everyone, for your continued confidence in my chairmanship. Councillor Batho, you left your name plate. Oh, can we? So, first item on the agenda is I need to do. Let me just see what you did. Some of this. Okay. So I will just reiterate some of those words. I'd welcome everyone to this meeting of the Town Forum at the Walton Suite. I'm Councillor Mark Reach, reappointed chairman of this forum. You didn't say the bit about YouTube, did you? No. So this meeting is being live streamed and recorded to the council's YouTube channel. Subtitles are available and advice on how to turn this on is set out on our website. Please can you make sure your phones are all on silent. In the unlikely event that it's necessary to evacuate the building, the fire alarm will sound. Follow the instructions given to you by the team, please. And can I welcome members of the public and officers and visiting councillors, Councillor Cremoyson and County Councillor Dom Hiscock, to the meeting. I'll invite you forward when it's time for you to make a contribution. So, turning to the agenda, do we have any apologies, please?
Thank you, Chair. Your apologies for absence received from Councillor Westwood. Thank you.
Fabulous, thank you. And disclosures of interest, please. Councillor Batho.
I have to declare a personal but not prejudicial interest as I'm an employee of Stagecoach, and I will leave it to item 8. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Aaron?
I'm not sure whether there's a personal or a query, but I'm a chair of trustees of a practically defunct charity called Stonewall Community Association, which might in some planet be awarded grants from the Town Forum. So.
Thank you. Any Councillor Todd?
I'd like to declare a personal but non-prejudicial interest, just so everybody's aware that I'm also county councillor for Winchester Westgate, which ironically does not include the Westgate.
Thank you for that point of clarification. Any further interests to be declared? Nope. Fantastic. So we move on to chairperson's announcements. So we start the new session. We're a bit later than we thought because there was a general election got in the way. So we'll compress the work we were going to do into a slightly shorter time. But we've got another good year ahead. We've got lots of stuff that we're going to be doing. Particularly pleased to welcome Stagecoach this evening. Been waiting for Stagecoach to come for some time. I'm really pleased that we've come along because I think it'll be a really worthwhile agenda item. Just today as well, I know some members have raised concerns around the facial recognition trial that's going on the high street. We'll not make, this is not the right place to discuss it now, but I know members have some very strong views on this, and could I please recommend that members and residents make their views known to Hampshire Police, who I think are running a consultation on their website about their trial of facial recognition technology on Winchester High Street and other places in the district. We move now to agenda item number 5. So that's pages 5 to 10 in your agenda pack, minutes of the previous meeting. Can I take those as agreed, please? Fantastic. A slight change to the programme. We know the date and times of future meetings of the forum, which are set out at number 6 as well. Agenda item number 7, public participation. Don't think we have any, do we? Fantastic. So no late additions to that. So agenda item number 8. So could I please invite representatives from Stagecoach and Mr. Hickman up to here and to give us a verbal update on Stagecoach. Mr. Hickman, do you want to do a brief introduction? And I think Councillor Cremoyson wanted to make a comment at the end of it as well. So I'll invite you up at the right time. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, this is James O'Neill. He's commercial manager for Stagecoach South, and he's kindly sort of volunteered. Well, we've spoken and he's agreed, I should say, to come along and talk to the committee and answer any questions you may have as well. So I'll pass straight over to him if that's okay.
Hello, yeah, good evening everyone. Thank you for inviting me along. I've got a few notes to give some background about where we're at as the largest bus operator in this area. I'm expecting lots of questions, so I won't delve too much into stats. As you can imagine, some things I'm saying are commercially sensitive, so I'm going to give some very rounded figures to try and explain the background about how the network is performing at the moment. As you can imagine, the bus industry has had a tough few years during the pandemic and then immediately beyond it. For the first couple of those years, we received money direct from government to help keep services running during that period where our commercial revenue was at its lowest with smaller numbers of people travelling. By and large, that money has now stopped and we're back running buses commercially in their own right and with relatively small amounts of legacy funding. So most of the things we're doing, about 90% or so, are buses running paid for only by people buying tickets. We've seen really big differences in the way that people are travelling around the network since 2020, in particular, and maybe more apparent in Winchester. Our city services are far quieter during the day than they were in 2019. We wouldn't have known in 2019, but it's become apparent now that Winchester had a lot of people who are probably more affluent and office working who, since the pandemic, have done more of that from home. So we've had to adjust our network accordingly, and that's generally meant running fewer buses during the day, so a bit less frequency. Routes that were every 10 minutes are not anymore, they're every 15 or every 20. That's also impacted Park and Ride, which is not as busy as it used to be. However, on the plus side, our longer distance services have grown quite a lot, and actually some of those are far busier now than were in 2019, and we've really invested quite heavily in those routes, in particular our route in from Alton and Alresford, the 64, and from Romsey on the 66, and from this month we're investing a bit more in our route from Andover as well. So those services generally are carrying more people than they previously had. Also apparent is the way people are travelling is different during the working week as well. So we're not carrying as many people to the office or even to the shops, but we are carrying more people in the evening and at the weekends. And we've seen anything up to 20-30% of an increase after 8 o'clock at night during the week, and in some places up to 50% increase in the number of people travelling and the buses running on a Sunday. So those are the areas that we're focusing on for our investment going forward. And I think it's fair to say that when we started building back from 2020, we really struggled to keep pace with putting things back on the road. We had a larger number of drivers at our Winchester depot who were older and either chose to step back from driving or took early retirement or went to part-time. And we also found it harder to recruit when there were various government incentives to get people back onto HGV and transport goods. So we did go through a couple of very painful years of being short of drivers. I'm pleased to say that's not been the case now for quite some time. We're slightly overstaffed, and that's helped us put extra buses back on the road. So during the year so far, we've invested extra frequency in that Route 66 from Romsey, getting really good growth in the months we've seen so far from that. And our plan ahead is to keep investing in those evenings, Sundays, and hopefully a bit more in the city network when there's a bit more recovery time gone in. I have to say, the real challenge we face is that those are the times that our drivers are least likely to want to work. It's really hard to get people to want to come in and work at the weekend, but that's what customers are expecting from us. So we're ending up in a position where we're running about 90% of the mileage that we had back in 2019, but we're doing it with far smaller number of overall buses in the depot. Every bus is working far harder because it's working that much longer during the working week. Another achievement this year is taking on the new contract for the Park and Ride. So whilst that isn't as frequent a service as it was 5 years ago, it does reflect that changing demand. Whilst it's not new buses this time, we're pleased to be using HVO fuel, which is the first time that in our local business we've done that. That's come with some challenges, but it does mean that we're greener than we were. The buses are Euro 6 anyway, but they're now using a fully vegetable based fuel. That is more expensive for us to use. We're still learning as we go. We've had it on the fleet now for 3 or 4 months. It's approximately 25% more expensive and 10% less efficient, but the emissions element is far better on a bus that was already reasonably clean already. Our step beyond that would be at some point to look for electrification on the fleet. We're rolling that out in lots of places around the UK. That's also not that challenges. The bus is still around double the cost of a diesel one. But the main issue that we have at the moment is making sure that we can get the infrastructure set up in our depots. So our site in Winchester is down at Bar End, not far from the city centre. We have explored and we have on paper some costs for tapping into the nearest grid connection for that. It's an incredibly expensive job. We're into over £1 million of expense at some stage to get a grid connection in to do probably half of the working fleet. And that's a challenge that the bus industry faces right across the UK. The vehicles double the cost. The electric infrastructure isn't something we can control in our own right. We need to talk to in this case, Southern Electric to make sure we can tap in and get the right supply. So we are committing to phasing in electric over time, but it's generally been something that we work in partnership with either local authorities or with government grants. So there have been 2 rounds of zero electric bus grants over the past couple of years. So at this stage, we're not in a position to put in electric buses overnight. It's something that's on a longer term plan over the next decade or so. We have electric buses in Stagecoach South, but we're waiting for some of those big number gaps to close. At this point, I'm happy to take questions. I think I've covered most of those main points.
Thanks very much. It's really helpful just to hear the kind of reality of running the network in a town like ours. You know, buses are critical to so many people, but I think you've set out quite clearly how it's a really challenging environment. And although, of course, apart from Park and Ride, we don't, as the City Council, have a huge, we don't play the same sort of role as the County Council would. I think, I hope there's an opportunity for us to work collaboratively over the coming years to make sure the bus network is a success, because anything that promotes public transport in this city is surely a good thing. I'm going to open it to questions. Thank you very much for taking that. First, I'm going to have to ask Councillor Batho to step out because of his outside interests. He's probably have to go and do a turn on the number 5, I think. So please get back afterwards. Yes, very, very good. And I note Councillor Scott has a question, but I think Councillor Cremoyson, if you wanted to come up now and ask yours, then I'll come to Councillor Scott after that. Thank you. If you come to where public participation is, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, members, for allowing me to jump the queue, as it were. So first, just to introduce myself, everyone around the table here knows which area I represent and who I am and so on, and we're here when I spoke in March, but for James here and anyone else who doesn't know me, I'm a city councillor for the Worthies, which is just outside of the town forum that these fine people are the elected representatives for. And the Worthies is very much a community which is very dependent on the city of Winchester for nearly all its public services and amenities and so on, such as primary health and more, and many who work in the city. And I'd say perhaps more than other communities beyond the town forum area, we have a very close affinity to the town area of Winchester. Some might argue that others are, but I'm going to make my claim for the Worthies. And we have several communities within the Worthies who are highly dependent on having a reliable bus service, and that includes Headbourne Worthy House, which is sheltered housing, and the Dower House, which is a care home, and we have many elderly or otherwise very vulnerable people living in our council homes in the Springvale area and elsewhere. So members here will recall I spoke at the last town forum and shared concerns about the reliability of our bus service, at that time known as the Spring and now known as the number 6. But I'm really pleased to see you here today, James, on behalf of Stagecoach. And I hope this can provide the basis of a future sort of two-way cooperation where it helps councillors understand the challenges and issues that might be within the power of a council to address that would help Stagecoach provide better punctuality and usage of buses. Or in other words, what can we do to help Stagecoach provide a better service, which then helps us achieve our objectives. And I was also doubly pleased to receive, and I think it was okay to receive this from Councillor Todd, an email from you, James, on behalf of Stagecoach, detailing some investments in the bus services intended to improve punctuality. And I think these may have come into effect in May. And what I can confirm is that over the summer, I have received feedback on an anecdotal ad hoc basis from people who are bus users regularly that seem to be getting the impression it was more punctual, or in their words, late or cancelled less often. So this email was actually I was really pleased to see that, because I kind of got the sense it was better, but I didn't have the evidence to back up why that might be. So thank you for that. And obviously I have to say, from a user perspective, things are not perfect. However, I think we all know that there are things that happen that are way outside of the control of Stagecoach, such as major accidents on the A34 and the M3, which can bring Winchester traffic right to a standstill. So we certainly understand that. I'm not sure that all bus users understand that. But I think if we have that two-way dialogue, we can help reinforce that messaging. So I look forward to hearing more from your answers to questions from members that enable us to sort of see what we can do to help Stagecoach provide that better punctual service. So thank you for letting me speak and provide a more positive feedback from after last time. And I guess what I've learned here is if I come and talk to the town forum, things will get done one way or another. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cremoyson. Yes, you're more than welcome to stay for the whole town forum, even though you're not strictly a town councillor. You are very welcome here. Councillor Scott, I think you had a question.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions, if I may. Are you under a government target to change from diesel to electric, even though, as you mentioned, the infrastructure is not there at all and probably won't be there for a little while, and you're reliant on grants. That's my first point. So have you got a target that you're meant to meet from the government point of view? And secondly, I've promised dearly I'd raise this somewhere, and this is probably a pertinent time to do it, when you've got some elderly people in a bus stop with no electric signage on certain points around my ward. You've got some single bus stops with no signage at all, and they always want to know, how are they meant to know when a bus is taken off or something like that, when they've been waiting for an hour plus whatever. I've promised, I know you probably got a good old answer there, but I've now finally found a forum I could ask that question to, and promised dearly to my dear residents that they have been heard. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. In answer to the question about do we have a target, we have our own target as Stagecoach that we're aiming to electrify or at least be non-diesel by 2035. That it could be a shifting target because not all the variables are in our control. We keep buses in our fleets for 15 to 20 years essentially. So we the owned price, the upfront price, is depreciated over that period, and then we obviously expect to scrap or sell on the vehicle. So at the moment we are buying small numbers of diesel buses because we can't do nothing in the places where we haven't been successful in a zebra electrification bid. Those are being depreciated over a slightly lower number of years, so a higher price per year, with the expectation that they might not last 15 or 20 years because we've electrified. The honest hand on heart answer is I can't tell you whether we'll meet that because there's lots going on. We are buying far more electric buses, very, very, very small numbers of diesel ones, and only where we have to. So that's definitely the plan. The bit we can't control is just that infrastructure piece. But in terms of government leaning on us, no, there's no specific we must on this date.
And the reason why I'm asking, because quite often councils were under the cosh quite often to say we all not going greener quicker. So sometimes it's good to know that a fellow stakeholder has got restrictions and may hopefully adhere to meet a target, whatever. And so we're all in the game together to try and get as green possibly. The county council road has obviously got their targets, the city council got their targets, and that's the reason why I'm asking questions, because sometimes we need the honesty that comes out, but it's not just a simple thing from going from A to B in this equation, is it?
And I probably should add as well that it doesn't mean we're doing absolutely nothing. So even where we haven't been successful locally on an electrification bid, we are getting cascade vehicles down from other places, which means we're losing our oldest buses in the fleet. So at the moment, we've got very small numbers of Euro 4, Euro 5 buses in our fleet. The expectation is that those will have gone by the start of 2025 and will be nearly exclusive Euro 6 fleet. There will be some Euro 5s probably, but our oldest double deckers will have gone, and that's because places in the Stagecoach wider empire, they've had electric buses come in, so we'll receive their Euro 6 hand downs if you like, but that puts buses which are 5 to 7 years old in our fleet, which still overall means Euro 6 bus has far better emissions than Euro 6 car proportionately. It still goes quite a long way to improving air quality, even if we haven't been able to do electric vehicles in their own right. The second question on real-time information screens, or perhaps more how a customer knows something. We do have information on the Stagecoach app and also on some third-party systems as well. So we supply data for all our schedules out as part of Bus Open Data. So that's a DFT-led work stream. We have to supply where our buses are at all times, and then that can be used by third parties to build other streams of data on our own app. If a bus is cancelled, it will show us cancelled. On the real-time information screens, generally those are provided by Hampshire County Council or sometimes by lower tier authorities. We don't own the infrastructure on the side of the road, so we'll supply data to it, but we don't own the kit and we don't put that up. So if there is no kit, then you can still find something online. I appreciate that's maybe not as easy for certain people in the community, but it is possible. And I guess it's a world away from where we might have been 20 years ago, where you couldn't even do that. So that is still an advantage. In terms of, is my bus cancelled, the fundamental for us is we shouldn't be cancelling it in the first place. And obviously, not all that long ago, 18 months, 2 years ago, we were really struggling with drivers. There were far too many cancellations. We're back down to fractions of a percent of lost mileage again now in our network. So the probability of a bus being completely missing is very low. If it's late, it is more likely to be because it's a bad day on the M3 or whatever it might be, rather than something of our own making. There are lots of reasons why a bus might run late. I'm targeted as part of my team to carry out work every year to improve our punctuality, to revise timetables and schedules, to eat forever as much as I can into that percentage of late running.
Thank you very much. Do you have any? Yeah, Councillor Thompson.
Thank you. It was a question about routes and how often do you sort of look at all the routes and sort of assess whether they are the correct ones. I represent an area which includes Chilbolton Avenue, and Chilbolton Avenue has seen a tremendous amount of development over the last 10-15 years, and it's a much more heavily residential road now than it used to be. With lots of families living there, and I just want, and yet it has no bus route, and going through it, and I just wondered whether you had given any consideration to running a bus up and down Chilbolton Avenue, which it's a major through route for lots of traffic, and it's also one of the through routes when the motorway is not working. Yeah, so I just wondered whether there are any plans to introduce new routes. I appreciate that you said you're not in a good place at the moment, but is that ever on the cards, I suppose?
No, that's okay. That's a fair question, and I suppose I should also make clear we're not in a terrible place. My intro was more to explain there's lots going on, and we have to make sure we balance up the risks and opportunities. In terms of how often do we look afresh at the network, I suppose we never don't look, but in reality we tend to evolve the network and our starting revenue and make it forever better as much as we can. Occasionally that means things might reduce, but we try and invest in places where we get growth. It's not very often we fully start again. In terms of running a brand new route, generally what we would look for, particularly in an area where there's new urban development, is that we would use Section 106 funds or SIL to give a kickstart to a route. So as a ballpark figure, every bus in our network is costing in the region now of £250,000 a year to run by the time it's out of the depot for 12 hours a day with a driver on board and we're looking after a vehicle for a year. And that number has shot up dramatically in the past 5 years. It doesn't feel very long ago that we were at 100k, 150, but we're not. We're well into the 200s now. So that target in terms of how do I find £250,000 of revenue a year is quite hard. Chilbolton Avenue has been developed. It's not still that dense relatively, and I feel it's probably a route in the longer term where if we could go that way on the way to somewhere else and there's a second pocket of revenue, then it might stack up. But at the moment, I don't think there's enough that we could get out without compromising something else. And there hasn't been Section 106 money to come forward to help meet that gap. The ideal for us would be that when a development is consented, there's a pocket of money which is used for, normally bus operators would bid for it, but it would give us a profile of funding so that, let's say in year one, there's £200,000 come in, by year two, it's 150, and so on. And 5 years down the line, we're incentivized to make that 250 in ticket sales, but we're not trying to find it in year one, where realistically we'd just lose £200,000 on our own. Like I say, in that instance, I don't think that happened. I can't give you a reason why. I suspect quantum of development is part of that. There isn't quite enough volume to make it stack up in its own right. So I'm not ruling it out at some point in the future, but at the moment it's not something that we generate enough income from, is the realistic answer.
Thank you. Councillor Murphy.
Hi. Yes, so I represent an area that includes Highcliffe.
So a big question and a little question. So the big one, I suppose, is around, you talked about the sustainability of the shorter routes as compared to how well the longer routes are doing. But it'd be useful just if you could talk about how, how actually that sort of decision is taken, how you're assessing, and in particular, if you could say, just give me an idea as a new councillor, how many extra people, is it 100 or 1,000 extra journeys a week? What would be the step up that would actually move these to more secure routes? And then my little question is, a resident raised with me that you've changed the timetable from the 1st of September, but the little notices at the bus stops, that those times the little cards hadn't changed. And I wondered whether that you've had a chance to complete that exercise, because that was exercising people's minds at Highcliffe Forum.
Yeah, okay. In terms of the roadside piece, we had lots of changes at the beginning of September. That is normal. It's the start of the academic year, and it's the right time to try and put in place updates. We weren't fast enough on some of those routes, if I'm honest with you. I think they are done now. I can't hand on heart say that. So we have three people on our team who cover a wider area and go around and replace that information. So some of it wasn't done as quickly as I'd like it to have been. It will get done if it hasn't already. In terms of the right number of people on a bus, it's a ballpark figure. It obviously depends on how much people are paying and how far the bus goes and how often it runs and so on. We're probably looking at needing 350 people travelling on a bus per day. Something in the region of 30-35 people an hour, but it does depend on that mix of how many are free bus pass holders, how many are paying a fare. At the moment we're a bit distorted in a good way, I think, by the £2 single fare cap. So actually our value on intra-urban routes is really strong. We get some reimbursement back from the government at the moment to reduce the fare to that level. That level of discount obviously isn't as high within Winchester, when the fare wouldn't have been much beyond that anyway, but it has really encouraged people to travel longer distances because £2 is great as the cost of fuel or parking at the end and so on. It's one of the reasons why that has changed. What I didn't cover earlier, I think, was we've got quite a difference in the return rate from our concessionary pass holders and fare payers. So fare payers are being generated by the £2 fare scheme, and that's really good. Those people we hope we will keep, even if at some point that fare cap changes or stops. It's been really hard to get people with free passes travelling in the same volume as they were in 2019. Some of that we think is because that audience has changed. We had an ongoing decline in concessionary pass holders anyway, partly really just because of the demographics and the history of who those people are. The people getting bus passes now are people who have grown up with cars all their lives, and 10 years ago they were not. And one of the areas we're really focusing on, and in partnership with Hampshire County Council and our other local authorities, is getting people to understand the value of that free pass and to collect one in the first place, because not everybody does, and then to try and sell them where the bus goes and what it does. We've got a whole new audience of people who are entitled to a bus pass and have probably never stepped on a bus, so that's on us to go and find. But the more of those we can get on a bus, it should be an easy shot at that 350 number we might need to make something viable.
So just so that's really helpful, but it sounds again like there's something we might be able to work together on to make awareness of the bus and encourage access. Okay, thank you. And sorry, Chair, I would say my apologies. I need to head to another meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Becker.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Councillor Scott for his question, because that was exactly my first question. We had the Winnell Forum on Monday, and that was exactly the issue that we faced. Was an elderly resident who has a smartphone, doesn't know how to use the app. So I wondered if there are any sessions that you run that assist people to use that technology, because she was frustrated that there can be a crash on the M3. When she's at home in Winnell, she's got absolutely no idea that that's the case. She's waiting for a bus, it never turns up. She blames you unfairly, but that's the case. So that was my first question. Second question, in terms of routes, again, this is Winnell focused. How do you know where people actually want to go on the bus? Because we have the number 2 bus, which runs between Winnell and Stanmore, which is great. It's a fantastic bus service. However, if you're living in Winnell and you want to get to the hospital, it's not a great bus service because you have to change buses, pay for another fare, which feels unfair because the distance actually isn't all that much. So how do you gather that information about other routes where people want them to go? Are they taking people where they actually want to go, or is it just the fact that it's always been the route and it's easier to leave it rather than change it?
Yeah, there's lots of that. Firstly, I'm going to use the line I've used before, but I do think there is something in when you're going somewhere in your car and you're late, you say, I was stuck in traffic. When you're going on the bus, you tell someone that the bus was late. It is that issue. In terms of how might we refine the network and where do people go if we're not taking them there already? Probably it is evolution. We don't radically change something. Every small change we make generates a lot of noise because we'll always upset people who want the bus to do the thing it's already doing. Of course they do, because otherwise they wouldn't be on it. There are probably limited numbers of buses that we would ever want to send up Romsey Road and past the hospital. It's a destination for everyone, but we can't send every bus there. So historically, the Winnall bus did go past the hospital. We probably still do have some people who expect it to, would want it to. I think that changed probably about 10 years ago now, quite a while. Winnall doesn't generate huge numbers of people. So the proportion who would probably go to the hospital is relatively slim. We don't know who we haven't got, of course. And I think the other point is that in normal circumstances, pre £2 fare cap, everyone in Winchester, or near everyone, would have been buying a day or week ticket because that gives unlimited value and would have been their return ticket as well. So they wouldn't be buying one journey, they'd be buying the ticket that allowed them to actually hop off of buses. At the moment, people have probably shied away from that a bit more because they're just paying for one trip, and as you say, they then feel the penalty of buying another one. And that's one of the areas where the fare cap maybe doesn't work quite as well for us, because it's moved that I've got a great value ticket, it's whatever it might be, £5 for a day and I can do what I want. Doesn't matter if I change, it's still the same price. We've slightly moved away from that because everyone's paying as they go, and then they feel a bit disincentivized compared to someone who might be on that one direct line of route. I guess my other point, particular to Winchester, particularly to Romsey Road, it is a traffic hotspot. There's also a limit to how many journeys we want to send up and down it just to keep buses reliable. It doesn't help that the Winnall route is also struggling, and even worse now at the moment with the A34 M3 junction. That in itself is a traffic hotspot. So to try and keep things more reliable, sometimes the cross-town links are harder, just because trying to explain even now to the person in Stanmore, my bus is missing. Yes, that's because it's still in Winnall Tesco and it was there an hour ago. That's our issue. So we try and balance all that up. We don't ignore it, but we do tend to evolve unless there's a really good volume of reason to change.
Is there an option then for a transfer ticket to the hospital where there's no additional bus, but someone who is travelling from Winnall or from Stanmore, the two most deprived areas of Winchester, for whom money is a significant issue, so they would be able to purchase a ticket to the hospital that would allow them to transfer in town to then get on the bus up Romsey Road, one of the park and rides, or whichever bus is going up there?
So from Stanmore there is a service 61. It's not that frequent, but that does make the connection to the hospital. It goes up from Stanmore along Romsey Road. Like I say, it's not that frequent, but there is a bus that does that. In terms of would we do a transfer ticket, my honest answer is I want to know where we're going with fare cap first. If we're in a world where actually we're accepting more people by singles, then we might look at doing that. The problem with transfers that if I'm not careful, everyone wants one, and then we start having, can I have Winnall to Alresford or something, and we have to be a bit careful what that means. Now clearly the hospital's a bit different, I get that, and that is maybe more sensitive. We've shied away from it, and we got ourselves down to weeks and days at the best value ticket. Do anything, we'll keep the price of those as low as we can, and actually that captures everyone's little journey. Like I say, fare cap now for 2 years has distorted that a bit. We're expecting a government decision reasonably soon as to where that goes going forward. We're on that set of conditions until the end of December. I don't think anyone really knows what happens on the 1st of January. I think I need to know that before we make longer term decisions. It's frustrating to us as much as anything. You know, my role is to plan ahead for the next 3, 5, 10 years, whatever it might be. I'm not actually sure what our fare setup will be in January at the moment, and that is a bit of a handbrake on some of our decisions.
Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. Your answer, part of your answer to my question might be within that. Like, let me set James. I had many happy journeys on the 66 when I was a student at Peter Simmons coming from Romsey, and it's really good to hear that their routes on the 66 will be increasing. But obviously there's been a lot of publicity around concerns about cuts to routes to Peter Simmons from other areas. My question is essentially, where you've got an increased usage on routes like the 66, do you at the end of the year review the impact of the cuts you made, the potential increase of revenue you may have from routes like the 66, and see whether you can offset the suppose less financially sustainable routes with a route that becomes more financially sustainable, if that makes sense? And if so, would that review happen at the end of the year? Because I appreciate it's not going to change this year, but at the end of the year for Peter Simmons students.
So I guess the process of reviewing what makes money and what doesn't is ongoing. So every 4 weeks in our management accounts, we translate that into what routes are good and what routes are bad. We don't make knee-jerk reactions on something that might have been bad in August, but maybe there was one-off reason for that. But we will continuously review. In reality, that means that no more than once or twice a year, that might translate into a change being made. Specific to Peter Simmons, we found ourselves in a position where we were running too many vehicles, not very well utilised. The numbers attending Peter Simmons have changed. Well, they change every year, but particularly in recent years, we've seen on our buses fewer people travel from the south of the city, but maybe more people travelling from the north. But our provision haven't really changed to accommodate that. And that has meant that there were routes which we were running double-decker buses carrying 30 to 40 people. Our school routes, because it's a vehicle in our fleet that we maintain all year, realistically we need in the region of £70,000 or so a year to cover the cost of finding a driver at peak time, a vehicle at peak time, maintaining the bus all year. And that only really is possible if we're filling the bus every time, and ideally using it a little bit off peak on something new as well. We were a long way short of doing that. And of course, what that meant was we were losing money on those services, which was then, it was almost the other way around. It was stopping us investing in the routes that were getting growth. So we were losing money, shelling out some of the income on keeping a college bus going, where we had no certainty that next year's intake would be any better than the last. So that review process, fairly inevitably, were we going to get new students in September from some of the areas which were low in 2023? The indication from the college was no, we weren't. And was there any subsidy to help cover that gap? The answer was no, there wasn't. But we've done something different with that resource instead. So it's not that we're just doing less and sitting back on all the revenue. We have lost people. That's always the last resort. It's really hard to get someone to catch a bus. The last thing I want to do is turn them away. But we have to be realistic and try and put that resource in places where I'm going to get return and keep that growth going. For the 66 overall, I think it is a positive story. We're back up to every 30 minutes. We've slightly improved what we're doing in the evenings and at the weekend. Romsey itself is growing, Abbotswood has grown, there's more people to get up there, we've got more marketing we'll do to try and keep that growth coming. The stats at the moment in the months we've had are really good. It's a route that's in the plus 20% year-on-year growth area. There's no reason why we can't keep that going. Does it mean we'll run more buses to Peter Simmons? If I'm honest, only if there are numbers to support us doing that. Ultimately, I don't want to be in a position where we're, if you like, financially supporting the college intake, because we'd just be asked by other colleges why we couldn't do that for them as well. And at some point we need to balance that out.
Councillor Morris.
Thank you for coming to speak to us. I have another question about the number 4 route between Highcliffe and Teg Down. And to give a bit of context, Highcliffe lives up to its name. It's quite a steep road, whereas Teg Down doesn't live up to its name. Teg Down is a very long, steep area. And many residents have contacted me about their disappointment at the decision to withdraw the service in the afternoon. I think it's between 2:30 and 5:20. My first question, I've got 2 parts to this. The first is, as a city council, when we make decisions, we have to do impact assessments in terms of diversity, because that's a commitment. And this decision, as far as we can see, I could see, will have a negative impact on people, on the elderly, on those with limited mobility, and those on low incomes, because it's a steep hill, it's too far to easily walk or cycle. So my first question is, as a commercial operation, you make decisions entirely based on whether they are commercially viable, and there are no other considerations that we can make you take into consideration. And the second one is there anything that Hampshire County Council or Winchester County Council or the Town Forum can do to improve roads, pavement infrastructure, build outs, pavement furniture, to make it easier for those bus journeys to work, for them to have more customers, to run more quickly, more reliably, and thus for you to find them more commercially viable and be able to keep them open? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, we're a commercial organisation. Ultimately, I can't run something at a loss. For one, it might be deemed anti-competitive to be doing something to stop someone else running that service instead. I need to be careful. Whilst there's always going to be an element where we've got routes which are very good and routes which are poor, we will balance up that to some extent. But we do need to make sure that there's something in the network that's contributing positively, because ultimately it's doing the reverse. It's undermining the network, and we can't be charitable everywhere because we'd have no investment potential at all. With Service 4, the gap was just over £50,000 last year. We needed to make some change to avoid losing that amount of money. It was an area where predominantly the usage was from concessionary pass holders, and we have got a few of those on the network. There's always been an element as well, specific for Teg Down, that more people will walk to frequency at Dean Lane Corner, where there are buses every 10 minutes or so, than wait for the hourly bus to their front door, particularly if they're fare payers. That's not the case, of course, if they're more vulnerable and that is their only choice. I do know that. But it doesn't help keep the Service 4 going if numbers on that bus go down and down, and they were. So we were at the point where those journeys in the afternoon were carrying, very small, sub 5 per trip, and 1s and 2s in the reverse direction, and that's not viable. In terms of the process, it's not exclusively financial in that we just strike it off the list because it's not making enough money. As I've said, I don't want to turn away any bus customer because it's hard work getting someone on a bus. It will be led by finance. We will talk to the local authority about our decisions pending, and there is a formal process before we make any change where we give at least 10 weeks notice to the county council to explain what is likely to happen, and there's a review period for them to ask us questions, and ultimately at 6 weeks notice we commit to doing a change, whether that's starting, stopping or amending a service. We will always consider, is the service growing or declining? How long might it be before, if it's growing, it reaches the point where it needs to be? And is there anything else we can do to try and offset the problem in some way? Now, that might be, in the case of Service 4, reducing the number of journeys at the moment might help make the rest of the service more viable instead. It might put some of those people onto the remaining journeys, which in turn boosts those number of people per hour. I don't know that yet, it's early days. But yes, Service 4 is a challenge in its own right.
And the second part of my question about providing better infrastructure.
Yes, yeah. The best thing for any bus operator will be that firstly, the bus gets a seamless and direct journey from origin to destination, and that could be delivered ideally by bus priority, where there is never a risk of delay, but otherwise the most direct and uninterfered route possible. So there are places where we speak to our local authorities about double yellow lines, if it means that it just eases a junction or stops a bus waiting behind traffic and giving way. There are areas where it might be possible to put in bus priority in Winchester. Obviously, the wider city regeneration plan might give opportunities for more bus priority. From my side, if we're running a 10-minute bus service and it takes 5 minutes longer in traffic to get into town and 5 minutes longer to go back out of town again, I've put a whole £250,000 a year just to make the same timetable slower. If there was bus priority, I don't have to do that, and I can instead spend that bus on running a new route to Teg Down or Chilbolton Avenue. So by far and away, the best thing is gets out of the traffic, because that's where we're unproductive. we're wasting lots of money to sit around burning fuel and not really going anywhere. That's our big ask.
As one supplemental very briefly is you mentioned that you gave Hampshire County Council 10 weeks notice of the change to the number 4 route. Can you confirm that? Because there might have been a breakdown in communication, because it seems to have come as a bit of a surprise to some of our councillors.
Off the top of my head now, that's the process. I can't tell you what day we said what from off the top of my head.
But that would have been done, you think? That's the normal process? Thank you.
Yes, yeah.
Councillor Todd?
Thank you very much indeed. So Councillor Morris has asked the question I was going to ask about the number 4. Another thing that a lot of people ask me about is the state of the bus station, which I think sits with you to maintain. There's quite a lot of weeds there at the moment. The paint is flaking, and I just wondered, I just wondered what your plans were for that. And then I've got a second question, but maybe we'll do that one first.
So we're reviewing what needs to be done and the cost that will be, and we'll be talking to the City Council about the extent of those works and also the lifespan of the bus station. It's tricky. We want the bus station to be as good as it can be, but realistically it's a site which is earmarked for demolition, disposal at least. We want to make sure that we're investing money and ideally in bus services for people and not having to redirect it in a site which is going to get knocked down in 3 or 5 years, and it's trying to reach that balance. So we are analysing what needs to happen. Obviously, and I get in your question, there's probably different levels of spend there. There's the tidying it up, which is relatively straightforward, and there's full resurfacing or repair of walls, the buildings. That's much harder. Obviously our contract is to keep it in a reasonable condition, but it's not a site we own, and it is a site which doesn't have a long-term future, so we've got to try and balance that.
Yeah, I mean, on that one, presumably things like weeds and where there's sort of flaking paint and things like that feels that would already, I think, make quite a useful difference, which people would appreciate. My other question was about your long distance routes, which is there's a new route to Andover. You've got successful routes to Alton and Romsey. A competitor has a successful route to Southampton and Chelmsford. The gap, one obvious gap, is Bishop's Waltham, and I just wondered what your plan was for that.
Okay, it's not a complete gap. There is a service. So service 69 runs every hour. It previously has been more frequent, so we've operated up to every 30 minutes in both the morning and afternoon peak. Historically, it survived with large numbers. Survives the wrong word. It generated lots of travel from Peter Symonds College. Again, being generic with where we think their numbers have gone, they're not getting as many students travelling from the south direction. There are other colleges as they are from the north, and that has slightly undermined the 69. So we're not running as much in the peak as we used to. It is a corridor where obviously there's lots of pockets of urban development that has put more people on the route, whether it's in Bishop's Waltham, Waltham Chase, Fair Oak. There are areas where there is potential to get new use. It's a long route. It's more marginal. £2 has helped it. It's not something that we're going to transform overnight, but it is still there as a corridor we'd like to develop.
One of the things that distinguishes it versus some of the other routes is it does take an awfully long time to get. It is much slower than the car, whereas some of these other routes are going to be either are very direct, most obviously the Alton route, but and actually the Chelmsford route, the Southampton route as well. So I just wondered if there was anything being looked at in terms of just trying to make it a faster route for people coming in from that direction. And there is a lot of development in that area, and a lot of those people want to get to Winchester. So if it was possible to be sort of concentrating them onto buses rather than having lots of cars coming up from that direction, it would help with congestion in the city as well.
Yes, and I guess at the moment the density of population is probably the biggest difference. So we've been, well, it's not that we've been fortunate, it is fortunate, or it is helpful that a lot of the development that's happened along the 64 corridor or perhaps around Romsey has been very concentrated and has quite quickly transformed an area into higher density, good bus population. So my value per bus is really high, that in Alton on the same line route, lots of people will now move in along it, and it's just helped bump up the route that's already there. Where we struggle in parts of certainly north of Fareham, around Wickham, Bishop's Waltham, is those developments have been much, much smaller. They haven't generated Section 106 in the same way, and they haven't given us, sites which ideally we'd have several hundred or even 1,000 houses, which suddenly the transformational benefit is much, much higher. So the 69 is in a position where it is quite straggly because it's touching lots of smaller pockets of community, and there isn't quite enough volume to get us essentially avoiding Fair Oak would probably be the one that would make most difference. It would help in planning and in development if we're conceding or we're putting forward sites which give us that volume, which will make a difference. So north of Fareham, we've probably got an opportunity there to get a reasonable volume, which will travel either south Fareham, perhaps into Portsmouth, and maybe north again. That might start making a difference because that's a consent of 2,000-3,000 houses. We don't have that south of Winchester anywhere else at the moment that will help the 69 in one hit kind of way. That's probably the biggest thing that makes a difference. At the moment, straightening the route would lose me more than I think I'd gain, because we'd probably be in a position where the people we've taken off of the main 69 still want the bus as well, and we'll end up running two routes, neither of which are great enough.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Scott had a second question.
I did. Another bite of a cherry. Thank you, Chair. One for actually Mr. Hickman, actually, a bit quiet over there. So, Andy, when we've now just successfully passed our local plan, and Adrian Fox's team's done an absolutely brilliant job for the last couple of years, bringing it all together, where does the discussions feed in on future bus development with future housing development as proposed in the local plan in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years? Do you do that in the last few years with Adrian's team, or are you yet to do that as the developments come forward for on planning stage?
It's usually done through the planning process, to be honest. When we're looking at the larger sites, they will be assessed by the county council, and part of the transport mitigation for those sites could be developers' contributions towards new services or providing park and ride sites, for example. So it's done through the planning process. The smaller sites do provide SIL payments. I thought it was interesting what James said about using SIL payments to support bus services. I don't think we've done that as far as I'm aware, but it does sound like it's feasible. So, we get different income streams from different places. A lot of the money for bus services from new developments would go to the county council. For example, they've taken some money for Kings Barton development, and they've recently announced that they're introducing a new bus service for that. So our role as a city council is fairly limited in that sense, but we do get involved from the planning side.
Councillor Learning.
Thank you. I'd like to emphasise that although I am the cabinet member responsible for transport in this particular forum, then I am very much a local councillor speaking for my local residents. I would like to give a little plug for Stagecoach's app, actually, because I do find it incredibly useful as a regular bus user. And also on the issue of transfer tickets, actually, if you buy an electronic ticket, it costs £4 for an all-day ticket round Winchester, which is incredibly good value for money, and also means you can hop on and off our park and ride buses. I am a bus user, and I do use the number 3, and every now and again, when it's pissing down with rain, I'll use the number 4. But the reason I and many other people don't use it is because it takes so long to wander round full flood that it just takes forever, and every now and again you'll get stuck behind a dust cart, or there'll be a builder's van in the way and it's impossible to get through, and it will take 3 times as long as taking the 3 would, which goes straight up the main road. I would like to make a plea for the people of Tegdown to keep their bus, because it is a long way out of town and it's a really big hill. That we do consider thinking about running it straight up past the hospital, down Chilbolton Avenue. As Councillor Thompson said, that is a growth area, and into Take Down that way, partly because that would also make a good transfer then for the numbers for passengers on the number 3 who want to go to the hospital, because then they don't have to come right into town and come out again, but could change in week. So like I said, that's a very local perspective, but I would ask you to think about it.
Thank you. Everyone wants to say about the cherry because I knew this would be popular. So thank you for your time. Councillor Morris, final question from Councillor Morris.
It's going to be about the number 4 route again. It's my favourite route. Some of the residents regarding the existing service, the schedule has changed. I think the buses are now running 15 minutes earlier than they were before, and the residents say that this seems to have been sprung on them without any sort of notification. And the existing bus timetables at the stops now have inaccurate information, and the residents have been putting post-it notes with the proper times on those timetables. So my question is basically, what sort of, under normal circumstances, what sort of notification would you give to residents of a change of schedule? You know, how many days in advance so they can know? And also, just for people to take down, when do you think they'll get accurate bus timetables at the stops?
I think the roadside panels should now have been done. I can't hand on heart say I've not been up to check, but we should have caught back up now. So there was a delay with the number of changes that we put up for September. It should now be accurate. If it isn't, it will be within this week, over the next few days. In terms of notice periods, when we commit a change at 6 weeks notice, the next job is to get on and sort out the information that we need for our staff, their duties and their working rosters. That needs to be posted generally 3 weeks or so, 2 weeks in advance. We tend to put notices out on buses, online, 3 or 4 weeks in advance. There's a period where it can be too early and clearly a period where it's too late. We did put posters out on buses during August to advise changes were coming. Obviously, that had to capture a reasonable amount of information. Generally, then the detail is on the internet, where you can read, find the actual detailed timetable and so on. For Service 4 specifically, again, I can't tell you what day the notice was put up, but there would have been posters on the vehicles. But yeah, the roadside has been slower than I'd like, and that's on us.
Thank you for the answer.
Well, look, thank you so much. That's been really helpful. I've learned a thing or two, and I think everyone in here will have found that really, really helpful. We've taken nearly an hour of questions. That's kind of more than we could have expected. So thank you again. Hopefully that's not put you off wanting to come back in future. If there are things that we can help with, or again, if there are any updates, the door's always open. I'll just give my plug for my favourite bus route, which no one mentioned, which I love, the 67. It didn't make Britain's top 10 most beautiful bus routes. It was robbed. It should have done. I encourage everyone to take it, even though it takes you out of Winchester town and away out into the countryside. But thank you so much. We really do appreciate it, and thanks for Aikman as well for sitting there. So thank you. You're welcome to stay, but I'll absolutely understand if you want to clear off. Cheers. So we'll move to agenda item number 9, which is on page 11 to 20 in your pack, which is WTF 331, which is the Winchester Town Account Financial Planning for financial year 24-25.
Just get Councillor Batho back in.
And we'll wait for Councillor Batho to come back in the room. Welcome back, Councillor Batho. Councillor Lerney, I think you were going to introduce this paper, please.
Thank you, Chairman. This paper presents the Town Forum medium-term financial projections to assist members in thinking about any changes the forum may want to make in next year's budget, which will be worked on in the next few months. As can be seen from the financial projections in Appendix 1, the increase in precept and the reprofiling of playground expenditure that has already been undertaken has stabilised the budget, with reserves staying marginally above the recommended level of 15% in the medium term. However, there are a number of pressures on the budget over the next few years, not shown in the figures. The increase in cost of building work has impacted on a number of projects, including the pavilion and works connected to the park plan at River Park. Contract renewal is likely to push up the cost of looking after our parks, sports facilities and toilets. Unlike parishes, the town is capped alongside the district. So unless government changes the rules, it is likely that we will have limited scope to increase income through the precept. And we will need to consider further savings if members wish to spend more in some areas. Areas that are currently under review are spending on cemeteries and the ground maintenance contract. An additional source of finance available for capital expenditure is the community infrastructure levy paid by developers. The paper details the balance and the funds already allocated to both town forum and community projects, and the town may wish to consider whether there are projects it wishes to fund, particularly in those areas which have had the biggest pressures of development. We have Mr. Kennedy here with us to deal with any questions of detail, and I'll ask him if he wants to add anything to that initial presentation.
No, nothing further to add. Thank you very much.
Thanks for that introduction. Do we have any questions on this paper, please? Well, I will ask. We've over the last couple of years, we've seen inflation have a really big impact on the town account. As inflation is starting to come down, could you just give a brief assessment of the impact that's had on our financial position, particularly with respect to our reserves as well, please?
So obviously some of the significant pressures that we were facing in the build up to the budget last year were caused by inflation, which peaked at over 10%. So that obviously brought significant pressure to the town forum, as it did to all local authority budgets. But we were forecasting at that time that there would be a decline. We weren't expecting it obviously to continue at that 10% level. So we were already forecasting a decline. That's perhaps been slightly faster than we'd initially forecast, but the estimates now shown in Appendix 1 are obviously a more accurate reflection of where we are now in terms of inflation. So obviously low inflation rates have a positive impact on the future forecast for the town, because it means expenditure isn't rising at that higher rate. And as Councillor Lenny said, because of the capping restraints on the town, it is restricted in terms of how it raises its precept, and so therefore if inflation is high, then that causes a significant issue because the precept can't be increased at the same level. So that's certainly had a benefit, alongside the review areas that were carried out last year, which have already been mentioned, which generated savings over that profiling over that medium term period in order to bring us to the position shown now.
Thank you, that's helpful. And just to follow on as well, reference the previous speaker when we were talking about bus services. Could you just say a few words maybe for Councillor Lerney about the work that the town forum does through the on bus shelter maintenance, please, because I think people maybe aren't aware of the scale of the work we do in that area.
Thank you. The town forum is responsible for a considerable number of bus shelters. This year we have also had the situation that a number of bus shelters were being paid for by a private contractor. These were the advertising shelters. That contract was due to come to an end. and the responsibility for those shelters would have fallen back onto the town forum. These are now being taken on by the county council, which will provide a saving coming forward, and we're also in discussion about the transfer of further bus shelters over to the county council, which may be helpful in terms of that budget going forward in the future. I think we still anticipate that the city council, rather than the town forum, will have some responsibility for particular shelters, particularly in the town centre, such as for the park and ride, and potentially some further shelters where we have particularly busy areas where we may wish to, shall we say, provide a better service than the county council might. But we will have to look at that going forward.
Thank you. Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Chair. Just looking at the change in pavilion at North Walls coming in, and obviously bear in mind that we've just had the fantastic pavilion opened over KGV. Trying to sort of just think, because obviously there's an awful lot of money we're restricted in raising, and we obviously pay out an awful lot. Can you forecast for us how much is that going to make for the town forum moving forward with the KGV already sort of there now up and running? Is that going to be a good money coming back to the town forum of people, obviously the football teams and whatever, going to use their facilities? Is that going to generate some money for us, or is that just covering its own cost at some other time?
Ultimately, obviously there'll be a full business case as each project comes forward, so that would consider the capital and the ongoing revenue considerations. I think generally in terms of usage and the fees paid, it's likely that any facility of that type, there's a net ongoing cost of running the facility rather than it being income generating. Obviously any income raised would offset the costs of running the facility, but it's likely there'd be a net cost involved.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to say that we are looking at promoting the use of the KGV pavilion for community events, but it was not designed as a community building. The car parking is some distance away, as we expect people to park at the leisure centre rather than close to the building. So there is limited use for that, but we have seen some interest in its use during the daytime for yoga classes and those kind of uses, and it's a wonderful facility, and while it might not be a money maker for the town, I think it's really something that we can be proud of.
I'm just going to jump in there because I was at KGV on Tuesday for a meeting of the community group, and the sports teams that have been using it have nothing but praise for the facility. They think it's absolutely beautiful. The other teams that are coming to play games there also absolutely completely jealous of the facility that we have provided. The cricket board is using it for their training, for managers and for ref. What are they called in cricket? So I'm going to call them a ref.
Umpires.
Umpires. You would think I would know that, and my grandmother will be turning in her grave. So they've been using it for that and first aid training. The girls football teams, they ran an amazing tournament last Saturday. They had hundreds of girls coming to play. Again, fantastic feedback from the players and the other teams, and they've had lots of birthday party requests coming in on the back of that tournament, people being interested in using it. So it is absolutely living up to what we'd hoped, but as Councillor Looney has said, it's not intended to make money. Its benefit is far greater than monetary.
Thank you. Councillor Stuart Cooper.
It's just a comment really to commend, I suppose, the financial this financial plan, and say that it's where other local authorities are having to make significant cuts to all sorts of things. It's very positive there's been such careful financial management here, and seeing things like the play area refurbishments we've had, which I know is a large proportion of town capital expenditure recorded here, that they've been really, really successful, and it's really positive to see that budget's in there until 28-29, as other play parks will be refurbished. So just to commend the team and demonstrate that's the sort of thing we can do with good financial management. So thank you to the officers and cabinet members and town forum financial team involved.
Thank you for that. Noted. Councillor Batho.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just following on from the comments about sports facilities, this forum has had representation from a number of organisations and indeed an individual, Tim Perry, last year around sports facilities in St Barnabas. The ward team have conducted earlier this year some preliminary investigations around the sort of reaction from residents, and had some very, very favourable responses. Just in terms of that sort of facility would potentially, sort of require funding from SIL as it goes through the sort of process. I'm just wondering how that is then sort of applied for, or how we would sort of plan that into this budget.
So obviously any individual project papers, committee papers would come forward as part of that, and there would be funding decisions within those papers and consultation in terms of what exactly the funding plan is and what the options are within that. So all of the different options of funding would obviously be considered. Obviously, as we know, there are sources of funding within SIL, within the town and district, that are potential sources of funding. As we said, the town earmarked reserve it's been stabilised, but doesn't have significant levels of funding within that. Borrowing from the district is another potential area, but obviously savings would need to be found within the baseline budget in order to support that way forward. So I think essentially there are a number of different funding options, and the options paper would consider that and would obviously come back to the town forum and to cabinet to get views and the necessary approvals in terms of how that would progress in terms of funding.
Councillor Morris.
Yes, I can also support Councillor Batho's suggestion there wholeheartedly. I see we've got about 289,000 of SIL money left over, which obviously is very exciting. I can think of lots of lovely things we could spend it on. I know that some council funding is apportioned on the basis of use it or lose it, and I just want to be reassured that this money is ours to spend now or at any point in the future, and there is no chance of it being lost or taken back by central government or another authority.
Essentially, no. Obviously, we need to have a plan, and there are still plans presented in terms of infrastructure, which evidence the fact that we need to charge SIL and deliver those infrastructure programmes within the district and city areas. But there aren't specific time limits in terms of using that funding, so there's not a rush to use that funding. It can be properly considered and allocated and approved as it needs to be.
If there are no further questions, is there any debate on the paper? Expect no. Fine. Well then, if we move to the recommendation, please, which is on page 11, which is that the town forum, that we note the financial protections in Appendix 1, and that we agree the budget timetable for 25-26 as set out in the paper. Is that agreed? Wonderful. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it, and look forward to the next step in the process. Thank you. We'll move now to agenda item number 10, which is informal group updates. I believe Councillor Batho has one. Take your time.
Yes, the Parks and Rec informal group has continued to meet, and we had our last meeting on the 4th of September. And basically, as you've heard, the KGV pavilion has now been formally handed over. So all of the work is now complete on that area. In terms of the play area and the mugger, there's a redevelopment underway, and the mugger is actually being repainted to provide a more clear surface of the activities. And that I think is should be finished in the next. Well, I think it's actually finished. They're just doing some final work in terms of the area. They're also, as many users of the facility will know, there is a very wet patch when you come from the garrison ground. That's being planned to have a path put in to the actual mugger itself. So that will be part of the final pieces of works. Talavera Road, the play area there has had a contractor appointed to complete the work. This was an area that was taken over from a registered provider who had initially put the work in, but the facility was actually it was falling down basically. So Winchester City Council have taken over and have now will be redesigning all the works, and that's planning to start work in mid-November. In Abbey Gardens, there is a small amount of remedial work being completed. The inclusive swing has unfortunately also been removed again. That is due back, or was due back actually today, but unfortunately there's been some delays in the parts that are required for that. So we're hoping that to be back by the end of the month. We are. We also talked about the River Park plan, and there is an update now on the website in terms of the actions and the sort of priority steps in terms of the next stages for that. So if you want an update, then that is, as I say, available on the Winchester City Council website under the River Park plan. The meeting will continue, and we will actually have our next meeting on January, 3 weeks in advance of the next town forum meeting.
Thanks very much. Any updates on any of the other informal groups? No. Well, that neatly takes us into agenda item 11, which is about the future of the informal groups. The paper's at page 21 and onwards in your agenda pack. Earlier this year, over the summer, Councillor Bathrow and I met with officers and did some work to look at the names of the groups and the functioning of the groups. There's more work to be done, but in particular, we were looking at aligning the work of the groups more closely with the town vision, which I know Councillor Bathrow is a big fan of, and we came up with the revised title for each of these informal groups, which is on page 25 of the report, which we think more closely reflects the work that each of those groups would do. Assuming you've had a look at that, there are a few things that we're going to have to do on this paper. So there are 3 recommendations in front of us on page 21. But before we take those, are there any questions about the informal groups? Okay, so this is often a slightly bureaucratic step, because we're going to have to agree membership of these groups as well. But if we take them each in turn, so the first recommendation is that the forum considers the items listed in appendices 1 and 2 of the paper, and that we agree the matters we wish to consider during the municipal year are set out there, and that we delegate to the strategic director, in consultation with the chairman, authority to set the detailed work programme. Is that agreed, please? Excellent. Now, recommendation number 2 is that we consider whether we wish to appoint the informal groups and accept the changes as shown in paragraph 11.3, which I very briefly touched on just now, and B, establish any additional informal groups. Are we happy with the recommendation as set out in the paper at that aforementioned paragraph? Is that agreed? Excellent. And then finally, recommendation number 3, that we agree the membership of these informal groups, which I will read out very shortly. As they are informal groups, it's not the end of the world if there are going to be some changes. There are still a couple of gaps, so I'm still looking for volunteers for a couple of those groups as well, which we'll deal with as we go on, but which we can update at future town forum meetings is probably the right way to do it. I'm getting a nod from the corner. Excellent. So if you just bear with me, I'll read them all out and I'll make it clear who's the chair of each of these informal groups, and then you can tell me whether you're happy. So the first of those is the Streets and Spaces informal group. The membership of that are councillors Batho, Lerney, Scott, Thompson, Todd, Wise and Westwood. And Councillor Wise has very kindly offered to chair that group for the year ahead. The second informal group is the Climate and Open Space informal group. Membership are councillors Batho, Becker, Lerney and Tippett Cooper, with Councillor Batho offering to chair that. The next is the Accounts group. We just said how important that is. We just looked at some of the paper. The members of that are councillors Lerney, Todd, me, and Councillor Wise, with Councillor Lerney offering to chair that. We have the Culture informal group with councillors Tippett Cooper, Eve, Morris, Thompson, and Westwood, with Councillor Tippett Cooper offering to chair that one. And then we have the Grants and Community Empowerment informal group, which is incredibly important, but we're a little under-resourced there with only councillors Batho and Becker, with Councillor Batho offering to chair. That's the one I would encourage members to consider very strongly.
Come on, guys, give out money. It's the best feeling in the world.
To swap from the first one to the last one. Thank you, Chair.
That's excellent. So we'll take Councillor Scott off Streets and Spaces and put him on Grants and Community Empowerment. Thank you for that. That's good. That's helpful. So, sorry, that was a quick rattle through, a lot of names in there. That is recommendation number 3, as I read out just before, that the forum agrees the membership of the informal groups, as I've just set out, for the 24-25 year, established as part of item 2 above, which you just agreed to. Is that one also agreed, please? Fantastic, thank you. And I think that brings us to the end of the agenda. It's 5 to 8. So thank you very much. And thank you for all those questions, particularly Stagecoach. I'm sure we'll have them back. Thank you. I think that's the end of the meeting.